You're misleading the public. You're lying to people.
We are part of a giant studio set. All the world's a stage in your mind.
Jesus Christ, can suck my dick? Suck my dick?
Suck my dick, Earth, with that bullshit.
Man's getting rude. Man's getting rude.
It could be a what's it? It could be an onion ring.
A hairless monkey zipping through the vacuum, or a potato rock.
Yeah, if we dumped what we found right now, we would be, it'd be bad. It would be bad.
Can't have can't have a flat earth and things making sense.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Gem's Flat Earth Sunday Roast. Sorry about our intro sequence there, which seemed to grind to a halt about 2 seconds in. As usual, there's a technical glitch to start the show. Tonight, in this especially litigious show, we are all judge, jury and executioner as we take a closer look at Sleeping Warrior's now infamous thesis even. I am your host, Gem, and lining up for the identity parade this evening are the usual suspects from the Debate Flat Earth and More Discord server, Curved, Kosho, and Lewis. Half of them didn't turn up, so I have to pick my targets carefully. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Happy
Sunday.
We've read them their rights and banged them in the hole. Lewis enjoyed this, but everyone else demanded a lawyer, so we got them one. Please welcome our very special guest this evening, lawyer by day and gamer by night, Artrexis lives.
Well, thank you for having me, Jim.
Good evening.
Big fan.
It's a great honour to have you here, sir. And, Riley has often complained that the rest of us are unqualified to offer a critique on his work. So we got someone who is qualified.
Well, I will give full disclosure. I am not an attorney from the United Kingdom. However, we do share a common history in the legal world. So
sure,
who knows, maybe that'll work.
Sure. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your rather extensive channel, which isn't related to this subject at all, I think?
My channel is dedicated to me taking a break from my usual 9 to 5 most of the time. I have since made a separate, smaller channel that is dedicated to not so much Flat Earth, but to the so interesting sovereign citizen movement.
Right.
You know, something that has always fascinated me as an attorney, trying to see somebody, pseudoscience versus pseudo-legal. So I'll pick my poison.
There's a surprising overlap between the two groups.
Yes, I've noticed that. I've delved with sovereign citizens for a long time, but when I delved into a little bit, into this whole flat Earth thing, I did notice that there's a significant amount of overlap that I don't think I was actually expecting.
Yeah, we've featured the First Amendment auditors quite a few times on our show because they.
Oh Jesus!
Yeah, they bring us entertainment. I'm not sure if they're really testing the First Amendment. I guess they are.
Rebrand.
Anyway, let's push on. What's this all about? First, we go back to almost a year ago, to the end of September 2018, where we find our favourite shouty twat in an especially cordial and excited mood.
Anthony's had some very, very big and important news. About 6 months ago, Anthony was looking into getting some sort of information regarding to the heliocentric deception academically published, peer-reviewed, something that's official. And in order to do this, he's had to jump through a few hoops, and ultimately it's going to cost quite a substantial amount of money. That's something else I'll come on to later. We will be putting our hand out, cap in hand, going to the audience and saying this needs funding. So that will also follow. But that's the boring bit. The exciting bit is the task at hand. So I'm going to pass over to Anthony, who's hopefully going to give the audience a bit of detail about exactly what this is.
I was looking at different research, different research courses at higher level, and I found one that does what I want. And my intention is to try and get a pro-flat Earth dissertation written that is peer-reviewed by my peers who are all solicitors or barristers in the profession, and basically criticize or challenge the law, the UK domestic law, on who is accountable for the national curriculum. I want to criticize the people that are in the education system on facts that we can prove are at least debatable in terms of the evidence, because they would have to prove the 93 million mile sun, for example, if they were going to show that their statements that we were being taught were actually true. And I don't know whether they can. Now, the risk with it, of course, is that it would be seen as being anti-establishment or somewhat unethical or whatever. There is a real risk that they may not actually accept it as a submission because of whatever reason they deem suitable, ethically, morally. It could even class as terrorist, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the position would actually be. We should be able to prove these things. It shouldn't be the case that I have to sit here week after week after week asking about the 93 million mile sun, because if the whole body of science is supporting this, where is it? I mean, one of the key things that makes this possible is the access to databases and resources that I currently don't have. When you go into any university establishment, you get access, you get login details, you can go onto the electronic resources databases, of which there are numerous ones. It's having that information, that knowledge, that stuff, which may well exist in science.
Registry.
But ultimately, it's without information, I wouldn't be able to know who's responsible for what we get taught. But the reason why I'm trembling a little bit is because I'm nervous, because it's serious. This is probably if it doesn't get rejected and it gets accepted and then it gets passed and comes back out the other side, that's when it can be released to like the journals and stuff, because it will be the case that there's a credible argument for whether or not we're being told the truth. But it'll be reviewed in or published in different journals as well later on down the line, not straight away, but once it comes back out the other side, and it'll generate discussion, awareness, promotion. Flat Earth might benefit massively just from the exposure from it.
So the amount that you're going to be asking for in terms of the fundraiser is 2,050, is that correct?
The course fees are 2,050. There is an admin fee of 50, and I think it's going to be. I need to find out what the final figure is. I believe the final figure is just over 2,000. Let me restate the risks. I mean, the risks are, because it's very political by nature. The real risk is that it'll be rejected, and I can't guarantee that it will be submitted, but it may get stopped. And if it does get stopped for some nonsense reason, then that tells people within Flat Earth that you can't challenge the establishment, in my opinion. But there is the real risk that this may not actually happen, in terms of the university in question may stop it.
Well, there certainly is a very real risk it won't be accepted. That's true.
Yes. Well, that was how it all began. He managed to raise this £2,100 it was he asked for in the end, and he got it in about, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. They coughed up for it. So he did pretty well, I thought.
£2,100, hey, for this.
Yeah, that's about $3,000. So,
yeah,
money well spent. Do you think?
Oh.
Well, he talks a lot about access to databases, and we hear him go on and on about this endlessly. That this is really where the money's gone, because he's got. Without access to these databases that the university's given him, he wouldn't know about this stuff. But, you know, I found this case very easily online. It's obviously a matter of public record, the case that he eventually cites. And obviously the law, the part of the law that he uses, again, is obviously on the UK government site. So I don't know what he's on about in that regard.
Yeah,
$3,000
to get him access to LexisNexis, but could only find 2 cases, and yet he only ended up citing 1. I mean, what the hell?
He also talked there about peer review, and he was challenged on this somewhat. Let me just get my little thing here. Bob from Globebusters had some doubts about this. So let's have a quick listen to that. Only a very short clip, this one, which I haven't got ready. I'll play this,
Right. Yeah. So, Tony, let me ask you a couple questions on this.
Oh, sure. Just an FYI.
About the peer review process. Okay, so take us through that. What exactly about that paper that you're writing would fall under quote-unquote peer review? In other words, what would be some of the responses that somebody would do in this peer review process for that?
But ultimately, this is peer review from a more credible, in my opinion, it's a more credible source than the science of astrology, because that's really what they're talking about. They're talking about the astrological science, and none of it's valid. We can't verify it, as far as I can tell. Nobody gets the same answer when you look up the distance of the sun.
All right. Well, I think it's a great idea. I think it's good to get it out there, and frankly, I just donated to it myself.
Well, it should be NASA's pinnacle moment kind of thing. Like, yeah, we measured the distance of the sun. This is how we did it. Such and such a body did it on this date. You know, it should be like landing on the moon kind of thing, because everything orbits the sun, right? Why can't we find that information very easily? It should be there at the fingertips. If everything's available for free on Google, why can we not get that continuous, reliable? It's just not there.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. All right. Well, beautiful. I think it's, like I said, I think it's absolutely worthwhile, and I'm happy to support it. Yeah, absolutely. All right, there it went. It finally showed up, and it's going up. You're now up to 935 pounds. Beautiful. So I'll go ahead and paste that in the chat for everybody if you want to get to this. But yeah, super.
I wonder how successful it would have been without Bob's sort of thumb of approval there.
Right. That must have helped, because there were 1,000 people watching him do that saw him make a donation. So that must have helped. I mean, Riley offered nothing really in terms of how this was peer reviewed, as he said. And of course he went on endlessly. This whole distance of the sun thing just keeps, he makes that part of his narrative throughout. It goes on forever, that does.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those things that the flat earthers always harp on, like there isn't evidence for it. For some reason, that's the thing that it's one of those arguments that they all bring up over and over again. Right. So it makes sense to angle that way to try and get support for it.
Or the idea that NASA seems to be the sole arbiter of the knowledge that is the distance of the sun.
Right.
As if it can't be determined or verified by other private or public means. But
right, yeah. It's only NASA that tell us that, yeah.
And amateurs can do it with little tools at all. I mean, I did it with a few people and got well within the range of the numbers they say. So,
what was your method, Kosho?
It's basically what Aristarchus had done, which is use the eclipse and other information to find out what the sun's distance and size was, and then for the moon, all you have to do is the quarter moon phase when it's a half moon in the sky. You angle the sun and the moon, and that angle that you get. Yeah, that gives you the ratio between the two.
Talking of astronomy, a lot of people were very quick to correct Anthony's use of the word astrology. He's absolutely incapable of saying astronomy. He always says astrology. And I don't think it's deliberate. in the sense that he's, sort of trying to discredit astronomy. That is not what he's doing. He's just says it wrong.
He's not sure which one is correct because he's surrounded himself with so much woo.
Yeah, that could be it.
I remember one hangout where he apparently when I think it was Sean Hubbard gave him a definition of the difference between astrology and astronomy, he actually said that based on how Sean Hubbard described it, astrology has more credibility based on his understanding of science and the scientific method. So according to Anthony's scientific method, astrology has more credence than astronomy.
Oh my god. Oh, where do we get to? Right, what's next? Oh, yes. Well, he's got a lot to say for himself as Riley. In order to reach his e-begging target, he makes a few unlikely claims and promises. Just another quickie clip, this one.
I'm one of a few people in England that has an undergraduate degree in law. And then a postgraduate diploma in legal practice. Science is subject to the law. The peers that will be reviewing my work are solicitors, barristers, and high up qualified people that are more qualified than me. And I would assert and argue that they are more qualified than science. It'll create loads of awareness and probably national interest, but it'll generate massive amounts of discussion and awareness, hopefully, if I can get it published in a science journal. But then I can also set that same document in terms of the legal journals, because once it comes back out the other side, or even just national press, once national press get wind of it, that it's gone through the other side, it will generate discussion.
Because it's so contentious, it's got legs to go potentially around the world, if one prefer a better phrase, because it's contentious and it has got the potential to make national press. Who knows? It could go global, if one for a better phrase, because it's contentious. Well, I would be seriously credible in academia, wouldn't it? In theory, I would then be able to get access to write papers, put them into journals, because I would be credited in law and it'll be critically acclaimed. So I don't really know what's going to happen to answer your question, but what I do know is that if it does come out the other side and they don't fail it, that's a problem, because then I can publish it other places with creditation prior to it, and I don't really know how they're going to get away with that. I don't know. I'll submit it to nature and see what nature say, but it won't be their field because it's not law. But they might run it. They might not do. But I'll push it and see what happens. And I only need one or two of them to publish it, and then I'm away. I think they'll try and discredit and bury it. To be honest, it's like it's blowing the whistle, isn't it? It'll be seen as whistle blowing. They'll not want that to be going out there. Like Julian Lestrange might end up living in Russia or something like that.
Yeah, like Julian Assange. just like that guy.
Oh my god, he really let rip there, didn't he? With the big ideas. It's gonna go global.
I told you this in before privately, but the fact that he thinks he can submit what he initially considers to be a legal thesis to a scientific journal means he has no fucking idea what the hell he's doing.
I know, that came up a lot. He seemed to think, he sort of combined the two quite often, and oh gosh, it was bad, that.
It's his idea that science is subject to the law. This is completely ridiculous, and actually goes against what you would think they stand for, which is if it were the case that the law could dictate what science says, then surely wouldn't they do that if it was all a lie?
Well, have you heard? I think we talked about this maybe the other day, but I know our Texas wasn't there. Have you heard about that Indiana bill, probably like 100 years ago, where this guy was trying to square the circle, like, and show mathematical proof of him doing it, but in order to do it, he had to basically change the law to change what pi was. So, like, his proof involved him changing the law so that pi was 3.2 instead of 3.14. The whole thing, and it actually got it went all the way up to like the Senate and stuff like that. So they tried.
I don't know necessarily about that. What I do recall is that no, the law does not endeavor itself into scientific determinations. I mean, that's where you get the Department of Agriculture, or I forget, it was either administrative decision or a court decision where they arbitrarily decided that tomato was a vegetable, even though scientifically it's a fruit, for the purposes of food standards for school lunches and whatnot. I mean, that's a thing but we all know scientifically tomato is technically a fruit, not a vegetable. But according to the law, they'll change it to whatever suffices. And that's not how you do things in science. It's separate. You don't do that. And it's clear that he's using this paper to try and circumvent the difficulties of trying to get actual science, flat Earth science, judged in a scientific environment.
Right, and we'll hear plenty more of that later. Anyway, within a few days, the Flatty community has separated from $3,000, and Anthony sets off for school with new pens in his top pocket and an apple of absurd bullshit for his teacher. Let's have a listen.
Basically, I've done my first lecture today, and I've found out some things that are really pretty cool, and I wanted to share them because, basically, the ballers are not going to like it. The teacher comes in and she introduces herself. She starts describing about what she expects from us and how we're to progress through the course. She basically said, "So, what have you got any ideas for what you want to do your work on?" So it starts getting political now, right? Because I've got to do the overlap with law. So it's not necessarily about the physics. It's more to do with where the law fits into it. So I obviously said, I think that the education system that we get taught from the national curriculum from the age of about 10 or so is not necessarily based on facts. It seems to be based on a consensus rather than facts. And the overlap with law is that I think that we have the right to be taught the truth. And she came back to the question, well, where does this overlap with law? And I said, well, the Education Act tells us and others what their obligations are with regards to education. And I said, and that's what I'm here to argue. I'm here to critically analyse the current thinking on a topic of my choice. And I said, and I'm pretty certain that the solar system, the way we're taught it at the age of about 10, isn't actually fact. It's a consensus that everybody seems to believe, but it's not actually factual. Anyway, the outcome that I learned today, and much to the ballers' disgust, is that I have the choice, and the university will do it for me if I wish to, which I will be doing, for it to be published in a law journal. And once it goes published in the law journal, in addition to being marked by the exam board, that just means I don't have to publish it, but they will do it for me. Now, that's great, because that's the peer review part, is like not just peer review by my peers, but peer review by like the law profession itself. And obviously there's going to be that overlap with so-called science. And basically, this is where I'm going to really get the ballers all tied up, because I'm going to poke the bear towards the end of it once it's submitted, and then I get the link for it to go on the journals, and it gets released as a journal. I'm going to basically point the finger at the ballers and make sure that they all go and view it from the website. And then the minute it starts creating internet traffic, I don't know exactly how it'll work, but I'm pretty sure that things that start trending will start to gain momentum. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that I am literally going to be the cat amongst the pigeons. And she concluded by saying, well, what is the law that you're going to be challenging? And I said, it's going to be to do with the obligations of the state. Like, what are we going to get taught? I said, I don't know what they are yet. I haven't researched it. I said, but I know it'll be there somewhere. She started to, her words were, I'm not quite sure which mentor I should give to you. I'll have to have a think about that one. And then she was like, we're going to have a chat about that. Make sure that we're going down the right way. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Let's see how this goes, because this is where it's going to get a bit awkward. So it's interesting anyway.
I mean, Ranty said earlier, it depends if you get on the course. He's on the course, his foot's in the door, he slipped under the radar, and not only that, the teacher's interested. She's obviously recognised there's a little bit of mystery about what you're telling her.
Yeah, a little bit of devious.
Oh boy, is he devious.
Well, she's just interested in giving him all the help he can to write the paper for the course. That's all she's trying to do. I mean, it's not...
Right.
I would hope that she is at least feigning some sort of interest in every one of her students' project.
So, Artie, how does that compare with your law school experience?
Yeah. Oh my God. When I wrote my graduation paper, which was a minimum of 20 pages, I had a similar talk with my professor, and at least when I was planning on doing it in the course that I was when I was taking the course that I wanted the topic of my paper to be in. And we had that sort of similar discussion. So I understand the environment that he's in. What I don't understand is the level of self-confidence that he has that this thing is going to make waves and is going to automatically be accepted into a law journal. Again, thinking that the law or the attorney, the legal profession can trump scientific consensus. But yeah.
Not only is it going to be accepted, but it's that
make way, get trending,
right? Which I don't think it's gonna I guess maybe this is a bit of a spoiler, but I don't think it's going to be accepted.
I have very, very low confidence going to be accepted anywhere.
Right.
I mean, this would pass pre-law in undergraduate, never mind a fourth tier law school. So I don't know what he's thinking, but again, this is kind of the personality that I've come to know for the last year and a half of following this.
Yeah, people with supreme confidence and horribly put together ideas. They're recognizing all the wrong patterns and are so sure of them.
Right. And he really is so sure, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what have we got next? Right. Oh, yes. Well, after completing an entire month of his master's course, Riley decides he's ready to take on the UK government, if only he can hire a legal team.
Right, so you want an update of where we're at?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So yesterday I had my first conversation that was detailed with a law firm. And they haven't agreed to take the case on yet because they want to look into it, but they want to know more. And we had our first cards on the table thing. And basically what the issue is the hardest point is to get across to the lawyers that what we're trying to say is that they can't prove their case. We're not trying to say that the Earth's flat. So that's the bit that we've got to not put in it. We've got to say that their case can't be proven within science or to a standard that a judge would accept. Now, the problem is when we show the counter evidence to show why their evidence is wrong and it's not proving the point that they're making, then it instantly creates the impression that you think that the Earth's flat. We also had an issue over the credibility of witnesses because they've got 150 PhDs on tap. Basically, we're going to be going up against the scientific consensus of 150 PhDs against maybe 3. And that in itself is a bit of an issue because if it literally comes down to the whole scientific body of evidence, the way that Rumpus describes it, then a judge is more likely to be persuaded by that. So we were trying to say to the law firm, look, focus on what it doesn't do rather than how strong it is. Because if it doesn't do what they tell us it doesn't matter how strong it is then. So it's going to be like Nathan's show in the sense that if we say that doesn't prove the point that you're saying it does, then they're going to say, well, on what basis? And then we'll say, well, it doesn't manipulate the independent variable, for example. It falls outside of science. And it's that level that we're aiming at because the law firm that we've got at the minute are really skeptical because what they want to be able to do is let the evidence fall with the experts and then let the experts argue out between themselves. And we're saying it's the experts that's the problem. So that's where we're at. And it was a detailed conversation. And They're not totally on board with us yet. They're definitely not on board. They're 50-50 at best, because this is going to be landmark. This is going to be really, really important. But it's it's training the law firm that we're working with at the minute, who may not actually survive. It's training them to see it the way that we see it, to argue it the way we argue it, and then use that as the leverage to prove that they can't prove the case, because it's not going like that at the minute. We're having this real psychological battle. It's like having a baller in the Hangouts with Nathan, but the baller is actually the law firm, because they're influenced very easily by the narrative and they're not influenced by the counter. It's totally semantic. And ultimately, I'd hate to be the judge involved in trying to work their way through this, because it's going to be horrible.
Is this attorney just as good as you are to represent these matters, or
no? That's the big problem.
Yeah,
because I mean, you've been there with Nathan's show. How many times have we had it where literally
a long time?
Yeah, they don't get it. They don't. The ballers do not get it.
Real quick, Riley, do you think it would be possible to be able to train, able to argue these things the way you can? Because I mean,
I don't know. Do you mean
it's going to be tough, man?
What we need to do really is we need to get the lawyer. Once we find if this lawyer is no good to us and we end up going elsewhere, then what we really need is the lawyer that we end up taking on to literally sit on Nathan's debates for a couple of shows and listen to how things are argued, and basically put cross-reference what he listens to on the debates into the legal situation, and then getting the same result, but through doing it, transposing it into the way the legal mechanism works. So even if they can prove Cavendish is true, then all we need to do is flip open that article from Scientific America that states that it's not the current science anymore. So then the whole argument's in the bin. So it's knowing which are the strongest counter arguments. And honest to God, like I say, the hardest thing is getting our legal people at the moment to understand that they can't prove their case, and we know all the answers, but they don't understand that we know the answers to give them. And then it ends up being totally semantic in terms of the precise meaning of the words, which we know the ballers don't like doing. But this is going to happen in court. This is what would happen. It would come down to the specific meaning of the words, and the judge would have to interpret the difference between, I don't know, this and that. And I can imagine the rumpus would be arguing, this is just semantics. Yeah, but the intrinsic meaning of these words becomes important in law. So we're probably likely to fall foul with the law firm, because they're going to think, fucking hell, this is too much for me to remember, because they've got to argue it in court, right? Someone's got to argue these things on the fly, there and then, in front of the judge. And we're the ones that need to be able to, we're the ones that can do that, but they're the ones that have got to do it, not us, because we're not allowed to speak. So it's like they're the ones that have got to be up to speed, and we just know that in itself, you kind of got, it's not just employing them to do a job. You've got to red pill these bastards and make sure that they're up to speed. And how are they going to do that? Yeah, that paper is part of this course that I'm doing, right? And that is what I write in that paper is going to end up being used in the court, because once we get something published scientifically within the peer review process, that's then got evidential weight to it. So it's really important what I put in that paper, because if we're going to end up using it, then it's going to have to be, once it's in the system, we can then cite it, because it becomes open to peer review. And unless somebody proves that the point's wrong, then it's seen as being credible. I mean, I've got until summer to submit it. And I was intending on sticking it in basically now, because I'm pretty much finished with it. But I'm also thinking, actually, if I put this in now, the direction that this case may go may end up not being the direction that I've written the paper in, and it may end up be better off just hanging back a little bit and seeing the direction that it looks like it's going in, and then tailoring it to that. What we're going to do, I'm going to run it by Nathan. If this law firm stays on board and we don't end up like disagreeing and just walking away, I'm going to tell them that they're going to have to come into some of the hangouts and look at what we're doing. But I'm also going to have to tell Nathan that he needs to tone it down a little bit, just while we, like keeping it modern in terms of its most up to date. But don't be too aggressive with them, because if we are being watched by our own side, then we need to present ourselves in our best, most polite, courteous way to create the right impression. Because we couldn't have them with like the rumpus, for example, who just will not let us respond, and then Nathan barking at him, telling him to shut up, you old man, and whatever. We can't really do that, so we'll have to just pick hangouts.
And Nathan knows some people just want to charge him up, because that's like their way of trying to bring him down.
Yeah, of course.
Oh my god, I want to die just listening to that again.
Yeah. Oh,
there's so much to unpack.
He's gonna get his paper published in a scientific journal. Haven't you heard? It's gonna be scientific paper.
And then he can use it as an exhibit in evidence. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Is the Onion considered a scientific journal?
Compared to Riley, I would say yes.
So, Artie, how many times have you taken instruction from clients in a Google Hangout? Is that common in the
None.
legal profession?
I don't do a whole lot, or I have not done any litigation, but I have peers who do litigation. I would wager none. They would say no, that they would never take courtroom strategies from their clients via a Google Hangout. No.
They've probably done it before, though. These lawyers, or I don't know. It's awfully weird. Like, why wouldn't they just talk to him in person? It's kind of bizarre. But I can see how somebody who doesn't have transportation and doesn't have access to good communication services would be able to use Google Hangouts to do this sort of communication.
Well, no, Lewis, they need to be trained. That's the purpose. It's so that Nathan and Riley can train the lawyers.
What
my
better
God.
place to start the training than a Google Hangout?
You need to complete your training, Artie.
Are you guys worried about all the science that Riley has packed into this paper?
Oh yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, and again, in that gem is what I wanted to go into, and what I want and why I highlighted this part of the hangout, his discussion with the attorneys, is because he doesn't understand what the attorneys are trying to tell him, and that is that it's not his job to make the scientific argument. It's not the attorney's job to make the scientific argument. They rely on the expert testimony. They rely on the affidavits from scientists who provide this countervailing view. It's not you. I mean, the case that he cites, he cites the plaintiff is not a scientist. He's not, and he didn't rely on his own personal disagreements with the film as part of his argument. He brought, he hired a firm, and the firm brought experts as part of their argument. So he completely misses the point when they say, like, hey, we may have 1-2 experts on our side, but they're going to have 15 on theirs. Right. He doesn't understand that what they're saying there, and he completely misses that.
So what Riley should be doing is finding experts that are on his side, and then getting them to present his arguments.
Yes, that's the whole point, is to get credentialed individuals. So he needs to find himself an astrophysicist or somebody,
an astrologist, maybe,
or astrologist, bring them in and say, hey, I don't know about this heliocentric theory. And then he provides, and then the attorneys would find what they say, and the judge's job is to determine whether or not they're credible. That's ultimately what it comes down to, is the judge's determination of whether or not this person is credible. And listening to the inane bullshit coming from Riley, who has no scientific degree whatsoever, a judge is going to be like, I don't give a flying fuck if the astrophysicists I'm basing everything out based on purely their own testimony. I find them more credible than some nobody who, without any lick of a degree, that comes even close to the arguments that he's trying to make here.
Right. He just seems so lost in his YouTube bubble, that they really, I don't know. He seems convinced. He really does.
And so do all the people he's talking to. They
Right.
they
Oh my
believe.
God. The level of validation he's getting from them is kind of sad, actually.
Right. I mean, it's funny. I saw after the release of this thesis, I saw in a chat the other day, Bob from Globebusters was there, and he said, I read your thesis, Riley. Pretty good. Or something like that. It's like, And I thought they weren't friends, and even he was saying that. So I should add as well, while everyone's listening, that apparently the version that's knocking around has been, he's deliberately messed it up, so with some spelling errors and stuff. And
it's probably the first draft that he didn't edit.
Right. Well,
I
I think it does have evidence of, because some of the spelling errors, for instance, right at the beginning of it, he spelt law wrong, and it's spelt, I think, Leaw or something like that. And sort of further on, he spelled education wrong, and he's just missed the E off it. So it kind of looks like someone was whipping through it quickly, creating errors quickly. You know what I mean? Just knock the first letter off a word and stuff like that. And that would be, very typical Riley sort of thing to do. And I guess the idea is that if everyone sort of takes the piss out of the grammar and that sort of thing, then he can just say, oh, well, I sorted all that out. And, everyone's sort of done their critique then, and it sort of weakens it if they do it again. And I wonder if that's kind of his strategy to, sort of draw out the critics,
It brings in more attention, more criticism of the paper, and that is precisely what he's looking for if the thing passes. He wants to increase traffic, so this is going to bring out and increase the audacity of what people say.
I hope that's not the case, but in my expert analysis, I know he's got really fat fingers, and he spelled falsehood with an L right before the D at the end of falsehood. I'm looking at my keyboard, and it seems within reason that he just made a fat fingered mistake, and it's very possible that that's not his final copy. Maybe he did do spell check, but I don't see why he would have shared something with those kind of errors in them.
Well, unfortunately for him, my focus was not on the spelling or grammar stuff. I actually looked at this as somebody, as an attorney, and I wanted to see, is he actually making a legal argument? So,
right. And when I sort of took him on Jose's, I didn't bother with any of that. I just addressed what I thought were stupid arguments that he was making, and I mean, not that I've got any knowledge of that, legal things whatsoever, but I had read something of the case, and the only thing I mentioned was that he'd used the term Red Indians, and I thought that shouldn't go unmarked, sort of thing.
Jesus.
Right, well, we've got one more clip, and then we'll sort of get a more enhanced critique from you, Artie, I think, make use of your legal knowledge here. I'm going to have to apologize to everyone because it doesn't look like the video is running very smoothly. It's sort of really jerky. It doesn't seem to be a big problem on the Hangout, and it hasn't been a problem on any of the clips up to now. It hasn't really mattered. In this final clip, everyone is on a cam, so I guess it is going to be a bit annoying. The protagonists here are, who are they? They're Riley, obviously, Roxanne, the globalist denier, and Robin, Lifting the Lid, that guy. It's Lifting the Lid's podcast, and they're on that. So hopefully it won't be too bad, but it's not looking good so far. So anyway, here we go.
And I've titled this podcast Hijacking the Education System because it is exactly that. And I'm super excited to introduce you today. So, Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, hello, hello. I came to Flat Earth through looking at pyramids. I realised that the pyramids were not tombs, and the pyramids overlapped with my background in law. So it's like everyone, those that criticise GoFundMe's, they're not all bad. They're not like Greater Sapien who stole $20,000 for a flight for Antarctica that we all knew would never happen. This is real world. This is true. This is real, and it happens, and everyone's going to benefit from this. Now, if it's partisan and it's taught one-sided, which we all know that heliocentricity is, if it's not told that it's subject to legitimate controversy, which obviously this is, otherwise I wouldn't be here,
then it's very likely to be partisan political, because it has to be the case that these children are taught a balanced representation of opposing views, and it isn't. It's a one-way street. This is the world you live in. This is the solar system. If you don't tell us that sun's 93 million miles away, you're not going to pass your exams. I mean, how much more of an indoctrination do you need it to be? So anyway, this document goes on, and basically there's so many things in here that if you were to read through the decision, the factors that influence partisan politics in the Dimmock case of 2007, it's almost as if it was written by a judge that's a flat earther, because everything applies to the teaching of the heliocentric model to children. And obviously, if it's promoted to children, and it clearly is, because there's a globe in every classroom. I mean, I haven't been in a classroom for many years, but I can tell you now that there's definitely no evidence of a geocentric model or a created. I mean, obviously, they put the creation arguments, they put that into religious education. It doesn't exist in science. It's not considered science. It's RE. And by putting it in RE, that kind of brick walls it off from science as not being realistic, whereas science is all based on facts and science and la-di-da-di-da. Okay. So by doing that as well, that's basically passive, it's stopping them from seeing both sides. But there's loads of things that, I mean, another good example on this Dimmock case, it says the deployment of material in such a way as to prevent pupils from meaningfully testing the veracity of the material and forming an independent understanding as to how reliable it was. Wow. How reliable's NASA stuff, right? But the third one, and this is a really good one, the exaltation of protagonists. So we're talking like Brian Cox, Neil deGrasse Tyson and co. The exaltation of protagonists and their motives, coupled with the demonization of opponents and their motives. Well, you look at the way we get treated. We're demonized, and our motives are questioned all the time. But essentially, there's so much that comes from this Dimmock case that it's written. It's written for me to find it. I know it sounds bizarre, but it's as if there's some divine intervention that put this there at some point, because I was going to find it at some point. Wow. Now, that won't make me any kind of self-proclaimed messiah. But when you read through the factors that Dimmock presented by the judge in hand at the time, it's almost as if he was a flat earther. That's how strong it's written. It's as if he's not talking about this case in question. It's as if he's talking about us right now. And when I read through this, It shivers down my spine, because it's written for us. This is our law, and this is the angle that I've now found, and this is where it starts to get really interesting.
I'm super excited that you see it that way, Anthony.
Yeah.
So let's move forward then. Take us down the next step.
So I'm a member of FE Core, and because I'm a member of FE Core, I ran this by FE Core, and I said, look, this is our in. This is what we need to do if we want this to get forward. So I wrote to the government and I said, look, this is what the law says. This is what you're doing. It breaches the law because, and if we take this matter to a judge, and you guys have got to present your evidence on a table to the judge and satisfy the judge that you can prove things like the distance to the sun, that you can prove things like gravity. We know that they can't prove orbits. We know that they can't prove the center of the Earth being a molten iron core. We know that they can't prove curvature. They can't prove axial rotation. All of these things are on the table for a judge to decide whether in law or not it's enough evidence to prove the point that they're making. Now, if we were to do this, I said to FE Core, this is the single biggest, most, what's the word I'm looking for, devastating. And I'm not sure what the word is, but the magnitude of this is potentially huge, because it only takes that one judge to look at their claim and say, yeah, you guys can't prove this. So I wrote to the government, and I had a response back from this guy called B. Bickerton. But one of the things that he said was that the orbit around the sun is an established scientific fact, and therefore we do not see any need to review the content of the science curriculum. Well, how are they going to prove this scientific fact that the Earth orbits the sun? If they're going to prove something in science, it has to comply with the scientific method. And the most important thing is that they've got to prove a cause and an effect relationship, right? So if science is going to prove a cause and effect relationship, then you've got to prove that somehow an orbit is a cause and the effect is the way we see the sun. But you've got to prove that there's a cause and effect relationship there. Otherwise, it's not science. We're at the point now where FE Core are funding this, and they've said,
push it as far as you can. Get yourself the best quality solicitor and barrister that you can get, which is what I'm currently doing. I'm currently sourcing one with Magic Circle, hopefully Linklaters or Clifford Chance or whatever. Basically, we want to get them in front of a judge, get their evidence on the table to prove the points that they tell us that are true, because and we're prepared to pay for it, because we don't believe that this evidence is actually true. And we believe that everybody's been indoctrinated, and no one realizes that they've been brainwashed. But that is the allegation that we're making, that these children who are now the adults of today, which we're talking to today, we're all brainwashed and by indoctrinated science that isn't actually science, that of a world that doesn't actually exist, and indeed getting taught a reification fallacy. And we're at a point literally now where I'm literally getting the legal team together and picking the right solicitor from the best law firm money can buy in London. And I need to find the right guy. But we're going to test this, and we're going to put the evidence on the table in front of the judge to see whether or not they can prove that there is a 93 million mile away sun.
FE Core. Anthony, can you just explain who they are and what FE Core means?
It stands for Field Engineer Corps, and it's a group of experts in their own field that have grouped together. So you'll have like chartered surveyors, accountants, solicitors, perhaps. You'll have like surveyors, physicists, biologists, chemists. They're all experts in their own field, and they're all people that try and prove, scientifically speaking, certain facts of life.
Are you willing to share what's going to happen next if you get a response?
Well, the next step is something called a letter before action, and our proposed legal route is that we're going to make an application to the High Court for a mandatory injunctions. Now, whether or not you think that we were created by God or otherwise, whether or not you think that we're geocentric, whether or not you think the Earth may indeed be flat, these are the opposing views that should be getting presented, because even if you disagree with them, at least you're aware that it's contentious.
Evidential facts. We're getting taught models, and it feels like, well, if we're going to be taught one model, then you may as well open up the floodgates and you may as well teach us every single model that's going under the sun. But then how much of a waste of time would that be? And I feel like, you know what, one model is one model too many. We only get one shot at life, and we're consuming so much of our time in education being taught a model. And I feel like I've been mugged off. I feel like I've been conned. I wasn't under the impression it was a model. It's all I'm out there telling people is, listen, I've questioned what I've been taught and I've found it not to be true. I suggest you take some time and look into it too. Other people have looked much further into this than me. And now we're here having this conversation. And I just want to say, as someone that knows I've been severely lied to in the worst possible way, this has got to be the biggest and the most positive piece of news I've had since I've woke up, that someone is full-blown head-on going to take it to the authorities, going to take it to the system and say, no, this is not on. You're going to have to prove in a court of law that you've actually got some evidence for what you're teaching these kids, myself included.
I mean, it's not going to happen yet, but it'll be within the next month or maybe 6 weeks. There will be a significant issue with regards to a significant disclosure. But the next step that I've got to do is find the right law firm with the right lawyer, solicitor advocate. And once that gets established, then we'll send the letter before action, which they will have 14 days to respond to. I might give them 21. But nonetheless, there will be a letter before action sent. And then at that point, that's the point of committal. That's when we fire the first shot. But if the first answer that's come back from this government official is that it is a scientific fact that the sun is orbited by the Earth, if that's their position so far, it's no different to the debate show in that we hear this from the Globers all the time, and we attack these easily based on the fact that they can't prove their claim, let alone the alternative evidence to the contrary. So we're more than happy with they can't prove their claim in the first place nonsense, because if they can't prove their claim, then that makes the application for the mandatory injunction pretty easy, because we don't in theory have to present any evidence, because we know that they can't prove any of their stuff, any of their claims, but nonetheless, it should be done within 3 months. And in theory, we should be able to get a judgment in our hands that says that the national curriculum is illegal because they're not presenting the balanced representation of opposing views. And if that is the case, that will rewrite science. And that means that we don't have to attack all these Globers on debates. It means that everything changes, and it'll be done pretty much, well, the judgment will be done pretty much overnight. But the actual process of changing it may take some time. because they're going to have to learn what are all these opposing evidence, because we're all stupid now. Not us, them. I think that the standard of evidence in law is much different and more difficult to satisfy than the standard of evidence within science, because it is all based on consensus. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you want to know where things are happening and when things are happening, you'll have to keep up to date with the Flat Earth debate, because that's where I spend most of my online presence time. And obviously when I'm in there, that's when I'll let things slip and let things go, because it is going to happen pretty quick. It's going to be in the next 3 months, hopefully. Shouldn't take more than 12 months. And it's backed, financially speaking, by FE Core. And basically it's the perfect storm. So it's so exciting that this is happening, and it's happening now, because in theory, hopefully this is going to be the game changer that we've been looking for. And if it happens and I'm part of it and I instigate it, that'll be my crescendo of my flat Earth journey, because I don't think you're going to get any higher than that, me personally.
Absolutely.
Some people might not see it as the highest point. Other people might see it as proving the next whatever fact in science or whatever. But for me personally, with an angle in law and evidence, if I can get that national curriculum challenged in court, and then they're unable to prove their claims that these things are scientific fact, that to me is my Maslow would argue self-actualization moment. I'll see my work as complete at that point. So watch this space. It's about to get interesting.
I see this as so exciting. It's like a David and Goliath, but I know you've got the slingshot. I know you've got the right aim, and you've got the right sharp stone in that slingshot. So I just want to wish you all the very best with that, Anthony. It's been an absolute joy listening to how you're setting your stall and what you intend to do. And Roxanne, is there anything you'd like to say as we wrap up?
You know what? All I would say is watch this space, because, like I said, this is probably one of the most profound things that we've heard happening within this most important subject. And what are we trying to do in this? We're trying to evoke change and reform that's going in the direction of the truth. So like Anthony said, watch this space. I think you're all going to be very impressed with what you're going to see happen over the next few months.
Well, okay. So it turns out that was all just a plug for Nathan's show. And then at the end, Roxanne saw that and thought, well, I won't have Nathan's show be the only one plugged here. I just plug for the whole space. We're all here in this together. Or the way I saw that go down.
Oh, he said so much there, didn't he? You know, he's going to rewrite science. Anyway, Artie, what's your take on that? I'm sure you've got lots to tell us.
It was hard for me to keep up, because a lot of it was, his own self-flating diatribe of what he's going to do and accomplish once this thing is, right, published, and makes headlines on CNN, the BBC, and everything in between of the. Oh my God, he has. Okay, so do you want me to go into it in depth now, or
yeah, let's do that. Are you happy to do that now?
Yeah, I can do that now.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
Tell us about this case and what his angle is on it.
Okay, so my understanding is that Riley is trying to argue that the teaching of the heliocentric model is in itself a promotion of a partisan political viewpoint. And therefore, the fact that it is the only model of reality that is currently being taught, it is therefore in violation of the law.
Disconnected.
Oh, it's back.
It's back.
We're okay. I think we'll be okay. I think we're good.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Let's start over.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try and start over. The thrust of Riley's argument is that he thinks that the teaching of the heliocentric model is in itself defined as a partisan political viewpoint, and therefore the fact that it's only taught and not other models of reality, for him in this case is flat Earth or whatever, geocentrism, etc., is a violation of the certain sections of the law, which forbids the promotion of partisan political views, in some cases outright, but in other cases without alternate viewpoints being shared. So the thrust of his argument is to state that the teaching of this classifies as a partisan political viewpoint. And he cites this case, the Dimmock versus Secretary of State for Education and Skills. It's a UK course where the plaintiff was a father of a child who was in school, and the school was, or at least the department was handing out copies of Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth throughout the school system for them to watch. And the father objected to it. He filed a lawsuit saying that this promotion of this view is promotion of a partisan political viewpoint, and that is his case that he's relying on. The problem that I have here is that okay, so in that case, the judge ruled that there were 9 elements of the film that could be that were, what was it, misleading or not part of the mainstream, or
I think they became known as the 9 inaccuracies. I think.
Yeah, 9 inaccuracies. That's right. And that was the holding of it, and that those 9 inaccuracies were required to be made known or presented by the teachers, at the conclusion of the film or while the film is being presented, to conform to the law. So Riley thinks that this is like, holy shit, this judge is a secret flat earther. He has no, it's so it doesn't say that at all, because he gets the film itself. The judge agreed it was partisan political, or it was a political film. It was clearly a political film because it was trying to effectuate public policy in its going.
Right.
But what he didn't rule on was the underlying science behind it. Both he and the plaintiff agreed with the IPCC report on the scientific consensus of climate change. So everybody agreed on the scientific consensus. It was the issue about the film itself and the public policy that was going to happen.
Right.
So what he needed to demonstrate was that the teaching of the heliocentric model was a problem. And he didn't do that in his paper. Reading it, like, I think I read it twice, maybe 2.5 times, and he doesn't make that connection. He is insistent on quoting a singular point where he almost seems to say that he doesn't have to make that connection, that heliocentrism is in itself inherently political. He just says, anything can be political. So he just says it's political and just runs with it, and it goes into flat Earth.
Right.
Flat Earth arguments.
It's weird, isn't it, that political? I mean, I did take him up, when I talked to him on Jose's afterwards, and this was the challenge that I kept making to him. I said, well, how is this political? And then he gets, I've had this same argument with him a few times, and he gets out this, the Google definition of political, and it says something, to do with government or the affairs of a country. And he says a school is the affairs of a country, and therefore everything within it is political. And I said, but, that's ridiculous. You're saying a rugby lesson is political, And I said, by the same token, what you're saying is that, we have a National Health Service in the UK, and obviously there's a Department of Health, and there are health ministers, and there is a budgeting policy, and so on and so forth. Those are all political issues. But if I break my leg and go and get it set or whatever, that's not a political issue. That's not a political act. And he just doesn't seem to be able to disconnect those two things.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. What would they do? Would they bring in a words expert and say which definition should we use for this?
Well, I mean, you can use his definition. I mean, like I said, I agree. The education system, the infrastructure of education, then that is the result of politics, and it is obviously affected by political issues. So you could sort of make an argument about that, but you can't then make an argument that stuff happening within that infrastructure is political because of that. That's just absurd, I think. Go ahead, Artie. Sorry.
No, it's fine. But for those in the chat who was asking for the case again that he's citing is Dimmock versus Secretary of State for Education and Skills, DIMMOCK. The citation is 2007 EWHC 2288. That's the where I got my citation from. So going through this, and it's I know I shouldn't be surprised by this because this is Riley. I should be growing accustomed to his research skills, but I do honestly feel like he only read less than half of the case that he's citing. I honestly don't know if he actually read the holding in the case or really understood the holding of it, because for example, I mean, the judge points out that even if we were to assume that this there is a political issue involved, there is an admission that you don't have to treat it on equal terms too. So, and I'm so shocked that Riley didn't see this on paragraph. I don't have the page number, but it's paragraph 16. I'm going to quote here where the judge is speaking about the issue of discussing political issues in the classroom or giving supposed balance. Quote, there is nothing to prevent, to take an extreme case, there being a strong preference for a theory, if it were a political one, that the moon is not made out of green cheese. Let's take out green cheese, and that the moon is not made out of light. So let's go with Arwen's argument here. And hence a minimal but dispassionate reference to the alternative theory. The balanced approach does not involve equality. In my judgment, the word balance in section 407 means nothing more than fair and dispassionate. So right off the bat, even if we were to, because again, the judge is taking the piss already on the flat earth theory. That if we were to assume in the extreme case that the idea that the moon is nothing but a light is a political one, and he says that because that's not been demonstrated before, then we could just the teacher could just throw it out there as a one sentence line, and then they can move on. Right.
It just has to be sort of mentioned. Yeah. I mean, it's funny what you said about him reading the case, because I had this sort of to and fro with him in Discord DMs about this case a few months back. And it was centered on him, his definition of political. And he said to me, he said, oh, well, Dimmock defines political. And I said, no, Dimmock specifically did not define political.
Exactly. What are you talking about?
Because neither of them argued. It was obviously a political movie, so there was no reason for it to be defined. And the judge specifically says this. And Riley was going, well, do you want to bet? And I said, well, it's a while since I read it, so I'll just check. And he said, oh, well, they went off on this whole thing about, well, I can't give you access to the database, so I'll have to send you a screenshot of it. And while he was doing this, I just Googled it and got the quote from the judge. And he said something like, he got out of it by saying, oh, well, they probably settled it in the corridor outside or something.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Just as well.
Wait, did he actually say that?
Yeah, he actually said that.
Oh, my fucking God. Oh, my God.
It's in DMs. I could show it to you. Yeah, well, so I did think, because I had read through it once. But, I thought, well, he didn't even understand that bit of it, and that's fairly fundamental completely fundamental to his argument, his definition of politics. Sorry, Artie, I'm rambling on, and I really want to hear from you because you're the expert.
So we go into the second. So in that line, the judge next talks about the film itself, and the first thing that he talks about is, the film is based upon substantially found, his words, substantially found upon scientific research and fact, and the judge agrees with the underlying scientific research. On the next page, we have the quote from the judge. For the purposes of this hearing, Mr. Downs, the plaintiff, was prepared to accept that the IPCC fourth assessment report represented the present scientific consensus. So, to make the analogy, or as how I would make the analogy, Riley is challenging this scientific consensus that all the parties are agreeing with.
Right.
So he is trying to liken the teaching of the heliocentric model to the Al Gore's film, when that's not where the connection lies. Where we have here, and here's the kicker, and here's where I say this is where Riley's argument falls apart, or at least in relying on this case for his argument. On it's paragraph 18, Mr. Chamberlain, the barrister for the defendant, the Department of Education, persuasively pointed out in his skeleton at paragraph 7C, quote, scientific hypothesis such as the hypothesis that climate change is mainly attributable to man-made emissions of greenhouse gases do not themselves constitute political views within the meaning of Section 407, even if they are doubted by particular political groups. But in any event, nothing in the 1996 Act or elsewhere obliged teachers to adapt a position of studied neutrality between, on the one hand, scientific views which reflect the great majority of world scientific opinion, and on the other, a minority view held by a few dissentient scientists, end quote. Paragraph 19. Of course, that is right, and sections 406 and 407 are not concerned with scientific disputes or with the approach of teachers to them. That, in and of itself, completely wipes away his argument.
It really does, and I must admit I didn't spot that, and that's the end of it, really, isn't it? There's not really a lot more you can say.
Exactly. It stops him dead in the water, because that's exactly what he's trying to use these sections for, is to challenge the underlying scientific consensus.
Right. That is beautiful, Artie. I didn't think it would be quite as cut and dried as that. Because his approach is also bullshitty, you know what I mean? You have to sort of, you're sort of pushing the crap back in a box kind of thing, and it's falling out all over you.
Which again, it demonstrates to me that he did not read this from front to back. He only saw what he thought were the perfect cherries to pick, and it ran with it throughout the entire for his entire paper.
Right, yeah. He earlier on he said, I don't know whether we had the clip of it, but there is a bit where he said, well, he's challenged on the political element by one of his friends in a hangout, and he said, well, it's got to be political, because if it isn't political, I haven't got a paper. And that's it. And then he sort of, so let's move on for now, and on he goes, and yeah, it's
right. Let's just run with it. It's political.
It's not as if it's one of the key elements of your entire fucking case, but you
right.
just gloss over it.
But I mean, the clip I haven't got, which I probably should have had, is where he gets to the point where he's got to submit this paper or sort of make a decision on it, and the university are saying that they're not accepting it, and they're saying it's too shallow an angle in law is the phrase that he uses a lot. And he gets in a sort of email to and fro with his tutor, who says his professor, who says, you know, you can't do this. You're going to have to come up with something else. And he says, I'm doing it, and it says I can do what I want. I can choose a topic of my choice, so I'm doing it. And then she hands him on to the head of the law department, and he says, we've made our thoughts clear on this. And Riley says, yes, so have I, and, you know, you've got a contract with me and you've got to do it. And so they withdraw their support, basically. So he finishes this without any help from a tutor at all. And that's where he ended up, and then he submits it. But I think that point is kind of where, when that happens, it's kind of obvious in the paper. Because I think that's the point where he just stops with the legal stuff and just whacks a whole stream of, you know, standard flat earth nonsense in there, from, you know, cold moonlight to, you know, we can see too far, you know, all this sort of thing. And I think that, I think what his idea was, well, I'll just stick a load of stuff in here for the flatties that have paid for it, and, you know, hopefully they'll be happy, you know. That's my impression.
Then an excuse can just be, well, you know, we knew they weren't going to accept it because they've got to cover up this lie.
Right.
Yeah, that's where I started glossing over, you know, starting on page 9, no, probably 7-ish is where my eyes started glazing over, because it just went on to vomit the usual flat earth arguments that, again, it's not his job. That's not what he's supposed to be doing here. And I think it's just for fucking filler, to make that $3,000 that he got at least somewhat worthwhile.
Right. That's what I thought. I thought that was what he was doing. He was doing that for his Flat Earth audience that we're going to see it afterwards, I think. Anyway, he must have felt that I made some good arguments against him, I think, in Jose's, because he sent me a quote from John Stunger, who was also trying to argue that schools were political because they're organised by the government. And then since then, he's been calling me a paedophile. So I was, you know, you've won the argument when they play the pedo card, right? That's
yeah.
What is with like a lot of these conspiracy nuts and their obsession with calling the opposition like secret pedophiles?
I don't know.
I've noticed that that's a thing in a lot of these hyper conspiratorial groups.
Right, definitely is, isn't it? I think because, you know, it can. They all love it, don't they? They all long for their fellow human beings to be shit in one way or another, and if they, you know, if the opportunity presents itself for them to think shit things about a fellow human being, generally they seize that opportunity. That's been my experience, and so it's very easy to sort of whip up a frenzy, isn't it, by calling someone a pedo, I think, and so yeah. So
they have to build up to it, though. They can't just pedophile. They have to. It has to be built up over the conversation.
Yeah, his problem is my panda avatar now. That's apparently some sort of pedophile symbology. So
really,
yeah, I didn't know this. And he told me about it. Something to do with black eyes or something. And I said, well, it's a red panda. It doesn't have black eyes. He said, oh, well, it's got like tears. So I don't know if that's also some sort of pedo symbology or whether he just threw that one in himself. I don't know.
I think they could just make anything up.
It's just the people who are doing the accusing. They know all the pedo signs. You know, they know all that stuff. And
right, because all the pedos are in cahoots, and
right.
they've come up with all this symbology to just secretly hint at everybody at what they're doing.
This is a person who looks a child's, you know, stuffed toy and thinks about child abuse. You know, I mean, who's the weirdo here?
Yeah, I think it says more about them than it does about you.
Definitely. So
well. Something interesting in that last clip that we watched, kind of going back to Anthony here, away from the pedo talk.
Right. Yeah.
He said that FE Corps is a group of experts. Stands for Field Engineers. It's a group of experts.
Oh yeah, that was great, wasn't it? Oh, they're biologists and they're chemists and they're surveyors and
why doesn't he use those experts in his court case? Like
Right.
why does he even need this group of attorneys, this team? Why doesn't he just take it on himself and go into court with his team of experts?
There is one clip where he's on Nathan's. I guess I didn't include it, where he sort of makes a little appeal and says, if anyone works for a big company that's got company lawyers that they could introduce me to, give me a shout. I thought, hold on, you're supposed to be the master in law.
Yeah.
And he was, and I don't know how he thought that these big company lawyers were just going to give him free legal advice. I don't know how he thought that was going to work.
No. They're being paid by companies. They're already on a massive retainer. Or they waste their time thinking about anything else.
Right. I don't know. Have you got anything else that you want to say, Artie? Because
I mean, that was the big point I wanted to show. I mean, again, as what you suggested, I could go off on him on the framing of his argument for at least another hour and a half. But however, I understand that this is allegedly like a manipulated one that's been thrown out there.
Right.
However, with that said, I have to point this out because it's triggered the fuck out of me when I read it. The fact that when he first cites the case, the case in general, he doesn't talk about it at all in the paragraph that he first mentions it. He asks like rhetorical questions, 3 rhetorical questions back to back in the paragraph without talking about it, and waits until the next paragraph to actually talk about the case. Oh my god, it's so inconcise, and it just it triggered the hell out of me. I have to point that one out, and because I made those kinds of mistake in my first year of law that I've since done my best to try and get rid of, and just seeing it screaming at me, I had to point it out. Sorry.
Right. Go ahead, Liz.
I thought his paper seemed worse put together than a lot of English papers that I've written in low-level English classes.
Right.
It seemed.
I think my video scripts are better written.
Exactly. But not even the grammar or the spelling. If you completely ignore that, I'm just talking about the way the information is presented and the order that it's presented is completely it's just out of order. You're supposed to have an introduction and then a conclusion and then a whole bunch of ordered, consistent points in the middle. And this is just vomited all onto the page. There's no order to it whatsoever.
What I wanted to ask Artie was what would be normal, do you think, for something like this? I think this is supposed to be a 12,000 word thesis. How many cases would we expect him to be drawing on for something like this? Surely more than one, I'm thinking.
Absolutely more than one. And you know what? If you let me share my screen. I'm going to make sure I don't dox myself. But just briefly kind of want to show you what I had. This was
I'll try and share the screen. It looks like the video is frozen again for some unknown reason. Everyone still here?
No, I'm here.
I'm here.
Good.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm trying to. I kind of wanted to tell your viewers as well, just because I'm trying to do that experiment right now, and just get through it. But I'll get to that at the end.
Is Artie still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Video's frozen for some reason, mate. I am sorry.
Well, what I wanted to show was just that my paper. This was my graduation paper from when I finished law school. So this is from 2010, and this was a 20-page paper, and I am not going. I don't know what the requirements are for grammar, for structure, for organization. I'm absolutely convinced that they have different rules, but my assumption is that they have some kind of rules of organization, and there is none. As he mentioned earlier. Sorry, Lewis mentioned that there's some sort of organization. Then there is none. So I have a heading, subheading, citations under going towards it, going into multiple citations. Again, sometimes you don't need to get have like 45 citations. Absolutely not required at all. But part of the ding that I got for this paper, I got a decent grade on it. However, I relied too heavily on a single source for my paper, and I got dinged for it because it's not a good idea, because there's always going to be something to challenge it, and you have to make sure that you're able to find all the research all the research that you can to ensure that you're making the best argument that you can.
Right.
Yeah. If somebody else has another source that directly contradicts the point you're making, then you stand in a much weaker position.
Exactly, and a part of that is that you're always going to find that, and what you do is you try to distinguish the current circumstances from that case to explain, while this on its face may be detrimental, here's why we make the distinction in these circumstances that step away from that case, and so on. And I think according to them, the screen's still frozen on.
It is. YouTube it is for me. I am sorry. I don't know what's going on. I'm usually fraught with technical issues, but we've scraped through to the end, I think. So, and unless there's anything else anyone desperately wants to say, I think I might end it before it ends itself.
Well, it would be a shame to play the outro without anyone being able to see it.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't bother. Maybe if I play the outro, maybe it will spring back into life magically. What do you reckon?
Well, at least they'll hear it.
They will indeed, if it was ready, in fact. All right.
Well, they don't know that.
That's true. So, thank you very much, Artrexis, for being with us. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and it's been really interesting to get a proper professional's take on it. So thank you very much for being with me.
Well, I appreciate you bringing me on. Thank you.
Thank you, mate. Thank you to all of the rest of the panel. And thanks to all of you for watching. We'll be back around the same time. Well, actually not. I said that last week I wasn't going to do this week, but we have. So probably the week after next. So until then, please rate, comment, and subscribe, and share this video. Have a great evening. Nothing happened. Oh, it happened.
You're misleading the public. You're lying to people.
We are part of a giant studio set. All the world's a stage in your mind.
Jesus Christ, can suck my dick. Suck my dick.
Suck my dick, Earth, with that bullshit.
But man's getting rude. Man's getting rude.
It could be a what's it? It could be an onion ring.
A hairless monkey jumping through the vacuum, or a potato rod.
Yeah, if we dumped what we found right now, it'd be bad. It would be bad.
Can't have a flat Earth and things making sense.